Hello and welcome to the Great British Bake Off. You know, I've wanted to say that for so long because I'm such a fan of the show, and I'm really excited because it's just come back on TV this week. It's on Tuesdays in the UK and Fridays in North America, and I'm really excited for this season because this year I'm going to do the technical challenge every week along with the Bake Off show so that you can see what it looks like on another side of the kitchen. So this week for week one was cake week, and for the first challenge the contestants had to make mini rolls, and for the technical, Prue set them a challenge to make her famous malt cake.
So it's our first technical challenge, and you set them a malt loaf.
It's sticky, rich. Nobody doesn't like a malt loaf.
Now, malt cake is something that isn't that popular in North America, and some of the ingredients may not be that easy for you to find. So what I've done is gone ahead and come up with some really easy substitutions that you can use to put your spin on this week's technical challenge. The great thing about it as well is that it's also dairy free, which means that I didn't have to work around the recipe at all to make it work for our food allergies. Let's dive in and I'll talk you through the ingredients. So make sure you check out the description of the video. The link to the actual recipe for the Bake Off will be there. First of all, we've got a strong black tea bag. You could use chai tea for this or just regular black tea. We have our mix of fruits, which is raisins and dates. Now I'm using dates instead of prunes that they used on the show just because I didn't have prunes this week. And we have some baking soda or bicarb of soda. I'm using maple syrup instead of the malt extract and instead of the black treacle as well. Now those are the two things I really couldn't find locally, so I decided to use maple syrup instead. That's still going to give us those nice undertones of flavour. Then we have our dark brown sugar. They quote muscovado sugar in the recipe, and this is just a regular dark brown sugar that I could find. I have my baking powder. I have my 2 eggs because this is not a vegan recipe, it's just dairy free. And also I have my plain flour as well. But before we start, let's get some tips from our experts.
Where can they go wrong?
Because it's just a simple mix, it's a little bit easy to undermix, and so you just take trouble to make sure that you haven't got any lumps of flour left in there. And underbaking it, it's likely to sink in the middle, and overbaked is just too hard and dry.
Okay, so let's get to it. The contestants were given 2 hours to make the technical challenge this week, so we're going to get right on it, and the first thing we need to do is make our tea. So I've just added my tea bag to our jug, and then I'm pouring 150 mils of just boiled water to it. Now we're going to let that steep for 5 minutes so all those nice flavours will actually infuse into the water, and then we're going to be adding that to our dried fruit. So next we're going to remove the tea bag from the jug and discard of that. Give it a good squeeze to make sure all those last bits of flavour are in the water as well. And then we're going to pour it on top of our fruit. Now in the directions here, it doesn't actually tell you to mix it in, but I did decide that I wanted to give it a good stir just to start to get that liquid incorporated with our fruit, as you can see here. And I'm just using my tongs because that's what I had on hand when I was doing this. Give it a quick shuffle around, and next we're going to go ahead, we're going to cover it with cling film or plastic wrap and pierce a few holes in it. That's because we're actually going to be warming this up in the microwave, and we want to make sure everything is nice and covered, and the steam that the microwave generates will actually help infuse the tea into the fruit as well. Okay, that's nicely covered. Let's just go ahead and pierce those holes as I mentioned. And you'll notice I didn't actually put an elastic band or anything around my cling film here. It is going to stay in place once it's in the microwave. So the nice thing about using the microwave method that they used in the Bake Off is that it's actually going to speed up the process of infusing that fruit. Now, if you have more time to do this and you're not doing it in the 2-hour time constraint, you could actually just leave your bowl of fruit to soak overnight. But for the purposes of the technical, I'm actually going to use the microwave technique, and I'm just going to microwave it for 4 minutes. And then you want to carefully remove the bowl from the microwave. Now it is going to be very hot, there's going to be steam, so I recommend you use an oven glove or a tea towel just to help you take it out of the microwave so that you don't burn yourself. You can see all that moisture on the top of the cling film, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So now we're going to pop our bowl of fruit onto the counter, give it a good shake, and then you're going to remove the cling film. Again, being careful, it is still quite warm, so I suggest you keep that oven glove on whilst you do this. And then the last thing we need to do to it is add in our bicarbonate of soda. Now this is actually going to cause it to fizz a little bit, so have a listen when you do that. And it's just going to start just the process of getting all those flavours out, which are going to cause that really nice taste in our malt cake. Give that bicarb a quick stir around, and then we're going to leave it stand for 10 minutes whilst we move on to the next stage of the recipe.
I don't think I've ever actually seen malt extract before.
Black treacle, 40 grams. Another ingredient I've never used in my life. I just want to come off. This is a joke. Hey.
Okay, so this is the part of the recipe where we're going to divert a little bit from what the ingredients tell us to do. So instead of using the malt extract and the treacle, I'm actually adding maple syrup instead. And because I'm combining those two ingredients to maple syrup, I'm going ahead and adding 190 grams of maple syrup to my brown sugar. And then we're going to cook these down just to melt the sugar while you keep stirring it until it dissolves. And that's going to give us that really nice treacly molasses flavour for the cake. So let's go ahead and get that heated up. So I'm using a small saucepan for this. We're going to heat it up over a low heat as well, because we don't actually want it to caramelize at all. We literally just want that sugar to dissolve for us. And you want to make sure that you stir continuously when you do this for about 2 to 3 minutes until you can't see those grains of sugar anymore. And because this part takes a while, I'm actually going to go ahead and speed this up quite a bit for you. You can see my timer is going down on the clock as well. And one thing I will point out, I'm actually using a spatula for this because you want to be able to scrape down that saucepan as you're stirring as well. And just keep checking it, make sure there's no lumps of sugar left in there. And then once it's heated up for those couple of minutes, you can take it off the heat and pop it to one side. And whilst that's cooling, we're going to go ahead and sift together our flour and our baking powder. So this is all-purpose flour, also known as plain flour. We're using 250 grams, and to that I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Now the baking powder is what's going to help our cake rise. We want to have a nice big cake so we can get some really good slices from it, and you want to make sure that you sieve it really well together. I like to do this with a spoon because I find I'm less likely to get flour all over my counter if I was just kind of shuffling that sieve back and forth. So the spoon actually helps it sieve a lot quicker as well. And that's perfect, there we go. So I'm going to take that off the side. And now we can move on to the final stage, which is combining everything together before we can put that cake batter into the oven. Now you're probably questioning, why do I sometimes refer to it as a malt loaf? Why do I sometimes call it a malt cake? That's just me tripping up on my words because I'm obviously from the UK originally and now I live in Canada, and those words are actually interchangeable. It all depends on the size of pan that you're using, and this is going to be baked in a loaf pan, as you'll see soon. So now we're going to go ahead, we're going to break our 2 eggs into a bowl, and then you just want to give them a beat before we start to combine them into our dry mixture. And that's because we don't want to add the eggs into the mixture at this stage. We want to make sure they're beaten so that everything is going to come together really, really nicely. Now, if you did want to make this a vegan recipe, it's a really, really easy substitute. You could either use 2 flax eggs, or I think actually using applesauce would be a great substitute for it. And I would suggest you use about 100 grams of applesauce for this. The ratio is usually about 50 grams of applesauce for 1 egg. I think that would be a really nice way to add some extra moisture to the cake as well, because it does bake for a long time and you want to make sure that that moisture is retained in it.
Combine the remaining ingredients to form the cake batter.
So now we've come to the all-important bit where we want to combine all of the ingredients as the contestants did. You want to start off by making a well in the center of your flour and baking powder mix, and to that we're going to add our soaked fruit. And make sure you use a spatula for this so you can get every single bit of that fruit out of your bowl. Next, we're going to add our sugar mixture. So that was our maple syrup and our sugar that we heated through. Again, using a spatula to make sure you scrape down that saucepan as well as you can. You don't want to lose any flavor at all, so make sure you get every single bit of that out of the pan. And I wish you guys could smell this, between the smells of the fruit and that molasses scent that's coming through from the mixture of the maple syrup and the sugar. This just smells divine. I honestly cannot wait to try this. So now I'm just going to give that a really good combine. Now, as they said in the show as well, when you are combining the ingredients together, you want to make sure that you don't overmix it, because you'll actually activate too much gluten, which is going to make your cake really tough as well. And again, because it bakes for a long time, there's more likelihood of it being quite tough. So you want to make sure that you're very gentle with it. This is why I'm not using a stand mixer or a hand mixer for this. I actually find I can get a much more gentle fold on it when I do this by hand with a spatula. Now, it is quite a dry mixture at this stage because we've still got that extra liquid from the eggs to add to it, and you can see that it is fairly tough to combine. So what I'm going to do is actually swap over to a sturdier spatula. The white one that I was using is actually a little bit too flimsy. This one I can actually have a little bit more force on it just to get right down into the bottom of the bowl and make sure that flour is combining really nicely. Okay, now we are going to go ahead and add our beaten egg to it. And this will make it a lot easier to give it that further, to combine it that much better. So again, I'm not really stirring it, I'm folding the ingredients together. That again is to avoid that toughness that would actually be created in our cake otherwise. And you can see that looks much better. It is a thick cake batter. If you're used to baking cakes, this does look very different. And that's just because of the ratio of the fruit to all of our other ingredients. And that looks really great. I'm going to give the bowl a last scrape down just to make sure there's no flour at the bottom, and then we'll be good to put that into our baking pan. And do let me know in the comments below if you've ever heard of a malt loaf or a malt cake before. Is it something you're familiar with? Do you think that you'll try it? And if so, are you going to try and source the original ingredients that they used, or are you going to use maple syrup instead? It would be really interesting actually to do this test with the proper ingredients, but they are quite hard to find unless you've got a really good British store in your area. Okay, so now that our batter is done, I'm just going to push that to one side. Next, we're going to get our loaf pan and we're going to prepare that ready for the oven. And I should mention, my oven has actually already been preheated for this. I popped that on at the beginning of this process to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the equivalent of 150 degrees Celsius for a fan assist oven. Now, to line my loaf pan, I'm just using a really good dollop of plant-based butter. Obviously, if you're not dairy free, just use regular butter for this, and you want to make sure you coat it thoroughly. This cake does bake for a long time, as I've mentioned several times, so you want to make sure everywhere is covered so that you minimize the likelihood of it sticking. And also, as a second layer of protection against it sticking, we are going to put a run of parchment paper in it as well. Now, whenever I'm lining a loaf pan, I always like to make sure I cut my parchment paper longer than the pan itself, so that when the cake is baked and it's ready to come out of the tin, I can just lift up those excess edges and pull the cake out really easily. I'm not having to prise it out with a knife or a spatula or tip it upside down or do anything like that, because I know my cake will come out much easier by greasing it and also by lining it with my parchment paper. So now we're ready to go ahead and add it to the pan. Again, this is where your spatula comes in really handy, because it's going to help you clean that bowl out thoroughly to make sure you don't miss any bits of the cake batter. It is thick, you can see it's not really running out of the pan, so you are going to have to force it out with your spatula as well. Keep pushing it down into the pan as you go, make sure it's in the corners as well, and make sure you get all those last bits from your bowl too. It's always a really good tip to make sure you scrape down your bowl often when you're doing something like this. And you can see that my pan is about 3/4 full, which gives it plenty of space to rise. I'm going to give it a couple of taps on the counter just to make sure there aren't any air bubbles, and then it's going to go in the oven and bake for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. Now that will obviously depend on your own oven, so just keep an eye on it at the hour mark.
It's going in now.
Oh, that is a lot for this little cake tin, isn't it?
I might actually take a small amount out. I hope I've made the right choice.
Wish me luck.
So let's take a quick look at the cake. It's been baking for an hour. I just want to check it and make sure that it's not overbaked at this stage, because it does look nice and brown for us. So let's just pop it down on the counter. Then I'm going to check it with my cake tester. It does feel nice and firm. It smells great too, which does suggest that it is baked and it's ready for us. Let's double check the tester. Everything comes out nice and clean, so it is baked. Perfect. The last thing we're going to do is, before it cools down, we're just going to brush it with some more maple syrup. Now in the recipe they actually suggest that you brush the top with malt extract, but again, because we're using maple syrup instead, we're just making that substitution and brushing that on here. That's just going to give it a really nice glazed look, and it will add that last little bit of moisture and extra flavour to the top of the cake as well whilst it cools down. Now one thing we are going to do is make sure that this cake cools completely in the tin. You would not want to remove it at this point, because there's a high likelihood that it would actually just fall apart, because it's very, very hot, especially because it's been cooking for a long time as well. So you have to resist at this stage and wait until the cake is completely cooled before you can try it.
It looks fine.
Scrumptious. So I think it's just right.
So just like the magic of television, our cake has cooled for several hours and we're now able to take it out of the pan. And look how easy it is. I just grab those edges of the parchment paper and take it out. It's that simple because we greased it really, really well. Now we're going to go ahead, have a close look at it. You can see it's got that really gorgeous golden brown color. You can also see fruit in the top of it as well, which means it hasn't sunk at all. But we are now going to cut it and have a look at what it looks like inside. And there we go, there's our first look at our malt loaf. So you can see the fruit is really, really nicely distributed. It's got a gorgeous color inside as well, and a really nice crumb with no real air pockets either. And I think it was easily achievable in the 2 hours that the contestants were sat.
Bakers, your time is up.
If malt loaf is supposed to have a split in it, then it's perfect.
I hope it's not raw in the middle.
Okay, so the malt loaf is cooled enough for us to cut, and we're going to have a closer look at it now. I'm going to try it as well. I've never actually tried one of these before, so I'm really interested to see what it tastes like. You can see that we've got a really nice distribution of the fruit inside as well. It smells amazing, so let's go ahead and try some. I'm going to try this little bit here. It's really good. It's actually quite sweet, maybe a little bit too sweet for me, which you could easily tone that down a bit by putting some butter on it, as they did in the show this week. And you could also toast it as well if you leave it for a few days and toast it to warm it back up again. I think it would be really, really great. Let's see what Paul Hollywood thinks of it.
I can't say I got a mouthful of Malt Loaf.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed watching this week's technical challenge for the Great British Bake Off. Make sure you subscribe to my channel so you get notifications of my next baking challenge. Next week is going to be biscuit or cookie week, so I'm really excited to see what they come up with for that, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.